This is Remote Daily, your daily dose of inspiration. This is Remote Daily, an oasis of innovation for your mind, your soul, your heart. Connect, act, recharge with Remote Daily. This is This is Remote Daily.
This is the co-founder of America's fastest growing pet brand, Bark, founding partner of Prehive, and the author of the Acorn method, how to get companies growing again. This is Henrik Werdelin. Henrik, welcome to Remote Daily.
Thank you for having me. This is
Henrik,
an exciting format. I've never tried this before. Definitely not the last time.
Oh, thank you. Welcome back anytime. You see, with dogs, you get a lot of bonus points here in the community. So we would love to see you every night. We just kicked off season 2. We're doing this every day. And it's been an amazing experience for the last couple of months. Henrik, you are a Danish in New York, or should I say Danish? How and where are you right now?
I am back in New York after a few months in Copenhagen, and this moment I'm actually in my office for the first time in a very long time to make sure that it still stands, and it does. So that's good news.
Are you alone in the office?
You know what? There's a few other. We have like 5 floors here, so like we're pretty spread out. I've seen a few other people, so I think there's 2 or 3 people kind of like going around. There's the people who are taking care of the office and are kind of like shipping samples around, stuff like that. And I've seen a few other ones. I think some of the ones with kids at home seem to kind of go here to seek rescue.
What are you doing with Bark? What is your personal work from anywhere strategy with your hundreds of employees that you have under your helm?
I mean, like, we were fortunate that we were pretty quick to kind of like ask people to work from home. I guess a little bit in, being a European, we obviously started to see it there before. And so we've been working from home for a long time. And the policy is really that we encourage people to stay at home. And if they, for whatever reason, need to go into the office, we have policies and procedures now and how they can do that in a safe manner. So when they need to use the photo studio, or we have like, other stuff like that needs to be done, then they can come by. But I think for like, the office here probably normally holds like 300 or 400 people. And I think there's 3 or 4 people in there now. And so it seemed to be relatively safe at this point.
And it doesn't sound like you're going to go back to the 300 and 400 anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, like, we also have a pretty big office in Columbus, Ohio, and I know there are people there using it a little bit more, and obviously our warehouses, and then like we have a food service where we like mix food and stuff like that, and so people are back there where they need to. But I mean, like, as a 21st century digital anchored company, we were already like using digital tools, and so I think we were all pleasantly surprised about how quickly we could just kind of like suddenly not come in. And so I don't know, touch wood, so far so good. We've seen our fair share of kind of like issues with logistic issues, and obviously the whole environment changing, but so far people seem to be at home and wanted to make their dogs happy, and so we try to kind of like do as much as we can to help with that.
Of course. I'm thinking about Bruno right now because I got to meet him on so many calls, and it's if you're locked down at home, it's even more important that your dog is happy. So I can actually business-wise not too bad of a time, although I understand the logistical issues. And Henrik, I'm still struggling to understand how you actually do what you do, because introducing you takes a while because you co-run 2 businesses, a family, 2 kids, all sorts of side hustles there, teaching, writing books, podcasting, and you're very good at all of them. So it kind of sucks actually to meet you, because you're just this kind of like ultimate champion in everything. But the good thing about you is that because you're a true entrepreneur and New York startup person, you share how you do things, and You wrote a Medium post explaining your system. You call it an 8+1 system, how you run things that are important to you in pretty much your entire life. So please explain to us how that works so we can all get where you are in a way.
Well, you know, credits where credit's due. It was actually a guy called Jen Shipper who wrote it up, who you know, sometimes is in the office here. I mean, like, I think in many ways, I try to look at entrepreneurship as somebody who enjoys solving problems in a scalable way. And I think maybe more than most, I like to invent systems that allow me to do so. And so I'm always tinkering with ways of kind of like how to create mental models and frameworks that will allow me to live a better life. And what I had noticed was that I was increasingly kind of like writing different kind of like experiments, or I was trying different experiments that kept falling into like these 8 different categories. And so I kind of like just turned it into my own little system. And when Dan launched this company called Super Organizers, which are kind of like, I guess, a group of people who are also very into this, he asked if he could write it up, and so he did.
You did identify 8 different kind of like zones: transact, invest, assist, learn, health, family, relationships, and ego/self-kindness in this article. I just shared it in the chat. By the way, yeah, I also have to ask you this, like everywhere you are, everywhere there's a picture of you, this is the picture that people see. So is that yours?
It's a very, very sensitive subject, which I had hoped you had not brought up, because it is not my dog. And my dog Molly is very, very upset that I keep sharing this other office dog. But no, it is not my dog. It is one of the other office dogs here from Bark. I have tried to recreate it. And so, you know, I'm on my phone now, but I'll share it later. I do have like the similar picture with Molly, but for some reason, this is the one that's being used the most. And so, no, Molly is a 8-year kind of Labrador mix that I rescued some years ago. And she gets quite upset with me when I do stuff like that. And so we've had many long conversations about that picture. And so it's a sensitive topic.
I can imagine. Yeah, you better update this one, because it's all over the web. I mean, it's like wherever, you know, you Google Henrik, this Labrador is.
No, it's like not having my wife on my wedding photo,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, your fault. The eight boxes you identified, the categories are here on the screen share. Like now being on Remote Daily, what box does that fall in?
I mean, like, it's probably fall under learn. I find that if I have to go and talk to people that I respect or admire, it's the only time I really sit down and prepare my thoughts. And so every time I do a keynote or I join like a podcast or Zoom like this, it makes me kind of just sit down and be a little bit thoughtful about what I'm actually doing, or my latest thoughts, kind of like how they fit into systems. And so I use it very much as a way of kind of like becoming better, of understanding kind of what I'm good at and how I can become even better at it.
And you to constantly categorize pretty much everything that you're doing into these 8+1 categories, you have to take a lot of notes. So please take us into your world of note taking. How do you actually keep track of your thoughts?
Well, I have 2 or 3 systems that I use. At its core, I use a notebook, which is just a little like paper notebook lying over on my desk. So, but it's just really thin. And so I have that, and basically any thought I might have will probably go into that. Or it would go into this little app I have on my phone, which basically sends an email to a Trello board. And so I try not to hold too many thoughts in my brain at any time, because the switching costs between them is just too high. And so I either just write in that notebook. It doesn't have more than 26 pages or something like that. And so quite often I run out of paper, and then I look through it, I put it down, and then I write basically a summary of the most important thoughts until the first page of the next one. And so kind of like as times goes by, I communicate kind of like the percolation of like all those different thoughts. On the more technical side, I have like a Trello board where I have any idea, any thought that goes in my brain, that kind of like that has some kind of action that goes into that. I have a long Trello board that's kind of like divided into those 8 boxes. And then I have like a daily to do. And then every morning I sit down and purposeful basically take from the to-do list and kind of builds up my list of things. And if something that takes too long time, I will then schedule them in my calendar instead.
Pretty sophisticated, but thank you for sharing this with us. I guess really a lot to take from that. Also the kind of combination of digital and analog to actually memorize things. So many of us are better at with actually writing stuff down, and to then keep on digesting that throughout your notebooks is a genius way of kind of like filtering your life and your tasks all the time. Let's look into your skill as a company builder.
Yeah, let me just start on the analog stuff is actually just to add to that. The reason why I use a paper notebook is because I think, like maybe many others, the second I open my phone, I get kind of like overwhelmed with desire to kind of like press all the notifications, and I basically just end down in kind of the rabbit hole. And so I'm trying to invent as many ways for me to kind of like still use digital tools, but not actually get sucked into the phone. And so I will use Google Home to make sure that I can do voice notes that goes into my Trello board without picking up my phone. I use the phone book, I use the paper book, because if I have a thought and I open my little notepad on my computer, there'll be a notification, I'll get distracted. Or I have a kind of like a Kindle type Android template that doesn't have any colors and can only do kind of like, you know, Instapaper and stuff like that. And so when I'm by my bed, I use that because I really just have to force myself for not kind of getting sucked into, you know, like all the wonderful things that your phone can provide.
Lots of nodding here in the room while you were talking. And well, let's talk about your skills as a company builder. You met your co-founder on a heart-shaped cruise ship bed. Why?
It seems to be like a good place to meet people, right? I mean, like that is a story that I think I volunteered once somewhere, and I guess you digged it up. I was at a cruise ship at a conference many years ago, and if you had chosen the cheapest ticket, they would automatically have just kind of buddied you up with somebody you didn't know. But because that this was obviously a professional conference, they've taken these bets and they kind of moved them apart, but they were shaped like a heart. And I, for whatever reason, thought it would be hilarious to put the bets together. And so I put the bets together and went to the bar, and then came home like late. And Matt, my co-founder at Bark, came down a little bit earlier, and so had gone to bed. And so literally the first time I ever meet him, we're lying there like in our boxers in a heart-shaped bed, and trying like awkwardly to figure out like how do you shake each other's hands like over the duvet. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Wouldn't work in COVID times.
You have built your company to 1 million subscribers together. Matt is a very experienced entrepreneur whom you had this fortune to share a bed with. He has, I think, started meetup.com as well, and is an amazing entrepreneur just like you. And you have now tried to kind of like, I guess, dissect what you have done with Bark into a method, and have also proven this method elsewhere. You have worked with a lot of corporates, Dow Jones, Lego, Mondelez, and of course your own company is the best proof to this method. Did you have written the Acorn method? So what the heck is the Acorn method? Please give us some idea why you go by Acorns.
Well, the Acorn method is inspired by a book called The Secret Life of Trees, which is written by a German gentleman who's a forester. And I find inspiration from kind of like quite random kind of like sources. And so I was reading a book about him, which I've got to think about when your colleague was talking about like the land. And so what daunted on me was that if you look at really what trees have done over the last 200, 300 million years, is that they have found out a way to kind of grow as a system. And what they've done is that they've figured out that the way to become dominant as a species is not just to grow taller, it is to grow wider. That you don't just become a taller tree, you come up with systems that allow you to regenerate yourself, so you create a forest. And as I was looking at why companies were having increasingly such a hard time kind of becoming growing, and if you look at the Fortune 500, you were seeing how basically growth in corporate America had been like increasingly slow, while investment into it has become larger. It kind of dawned on me that maybe they were facing the same problem, that instead of trying to just grow bigger, they need to try to think about how to grow wider. And so I think it was a elegant metaphor for thinking about business building without getting so stuck in this kind of comparison game, which you normally do, where people would maybe use an example of Amazon and Google and Apple that's been amazing in doing this. And then people say, well, like I run a pet business, I'm not Google, so like these doesn't compare. And so I was trying to create an abstraction kind of like layer between the argument that I was hoping to make and then having the concrete cases out there.
One could argue that companies already have so much in place to solve what you're proposing. Like there's the world of accelerators, and then there's the innovation labs, and there's the garages, and then there's the workshop series on reinventing the business, and all of these things were massively expensive. There have been so many ways to innovate within organizations. Actually, one of them joined us a few weeks ago, which was Whereby from Norway. Whereby, the Zoom competitor that looks better, but has also a completely different approach to much smaller groups, was built in Norway's largest telecommunications company and grew out of that. Very complicated, long story, but it actually worked. So why do we need a new method at all?
I don't think necessarily we need a new method. I think that I think there's two answers. We've tried a lot of different things to teach how to companies to innovate. I think if we're just looking at the pure numbers, they don't seem to work. And so, as I was making the earlier point, we invest probably 10 times the amount of money in corporate innovation that we do in venture. And the big companies are growing increasingly slower and slower and slower. So if we just look at pure like company growth as in the asset class, we just have to be honest with ourselves that the methods doesn't really seem to yield the outcomes that we wanted. And so I don't see this as being something that says you shouldn't do anything else, you should just do this. What I do think is that the cases that you mentioned, like this, for example, from the Norwegian company, you don't have that many stories we can talk about. We don't have hundreds and hundreds of those examples. And I think that is because that is incredibly difficult for big companies to build from scratch. And many of them have completely forgotten how to do so. And they don't have the structures or the infrastructure to begin building from scratch anywhere. And so I think for me, it's less a book about how to convince something like the Norwegian telecom to do this. It's just to basically light a spotlight on that way of thinking and saying more companies should do that.
And you have done this with Bark. Like when I looked on your website, there's like all sorts of little acorns, like all sorts of sub businesses that you have started on the bottom of the website. So you apply this every day to Bark in what way? How do you apply this every day?
In many ways, I think part of the success of Bark is that we really took it upon ourselves to say we shouldn't just be kind of a stuff in a box business. Barkbox, which is our biggest business line, was the first. And I think what we did different from other subscription companies out there, we constantly kind of was looking at other ways of trying to solve the problems that the customer was looking for us for a solution for. And so we have a food line, we have a dental line, we have homeware, so beds and pee pads and stuff like that. We have membership dog parks. We have a lot of those different things. And we also have a whole roster of things that we tried that didn't work. And so in many ways, if you look at like a company like Apple, for example, and you say, what is Apple in the business of? And you're looking at their percentage of revenue of the business line in the total revenue, what you will see is that these things have changed a lot over time. Apple used to be a desktop computer company, then it became an iPod, a music player company, then it became a phone company, and now it's trying to become a service company. And I think that kind of like strategy of constantly trying to figure out like, how do we take some talent and how do we give it some of the company's DNA and how do we drop it at a fertile place and then make sure that it gets support so that it can grow quick and up, that type of thinking is just not very prevalent in a lot of organizations. Most of the organizations are thinking about, how do I create a higher margin on the business I have, or how do I take the existing product I have and launch it in new markets? Now, when you squeeze your margin profile to a point where you can't squeeze it anymore, and you launched in all countries, you're kind of out of options. And so what the Acorn method does is try to give you both the theory and the tactics of how you go about and building from scratch.
A lot of people these days, and I include myself here, are creating subscription-based businesses, which you have been doing so successfully. At Remote Daily, we are going to start a subscription to be part of this daily experience and experience more workshops, maybe get a discount at Barkbox down the line. What to all the people out there who are thinking about subscription-based businesses, the artists, the media, so many companies who have never even explored this space. What is the one thing we should all not do when building a subscription-based business?
I don't use the word subscription as much as I use the word membership, because I think, so maybe you can start there. Subscription is the mechanics on how people pay you on a recurring basis. When I think of membership, I think about something else. I think about having a long-term relationship with a customer, and then allowing yourself the permission to try to solve the problems that they have in a lot of different ways. And I think what historically companies were doing was that they saw themselves as being in the business of providing a specific utility. I'm a media company, or I'm an events company, or I'm an e-commerce company. And what I think is happening with technology is that all those utilities are being democratized. So a company like Disney is neither a products company or a media company or an events company. They are all of those different things. And the same thing with Amazon, the same thing with Google, and same thing with Apple. And so what I think is core for subscription is the relationship between you and that individual customer. And I think very much, what in terms of what Seth Godin, the quote you said for Seth Godin is, find a group of people where you feel you have something to value, and then basically listen every time they say it sucks that, and then every time they say it sucks that, if you can come up with a products and service that help them solve that problem, then I think you over time will create a very strong relationship with that customer, and in return they will be very happy to give you some compensation for helping you solve their problems.
Check and found the group. Kudos to you all out there for being part of Remote Daily, and please tell us more often, it sucks that. I think that will be my conversation starter for all the debriefings and future conversations behind the scenes.
I mean, like, our notepads here in the office have that just written on them. It just says it sucks that, because I think the interesting thing with business ideas is that everybody is so precious about ideas. It's like, if the amount of time that people have called me and said, I'd like to tell you, like, get feedback on my business idea, but you have to sign an NDA. And I'm like, meanwhile, if you ask any CEO, anybody, what do you think is one of your big problems right now? People will talk your ear off for hours, right? Now, for an entrepreneur, like, the problem is really like the meaty thing. If you have a real articulated, well-defined problem, then it's often pretty easy to come up with a solution for it. And then if you can make it cheaper than people are willing to pay for it, then you have a good business. And so I find this idea of problem mining is like one of the most valuable things that you can do as a business leader and as an entrepreneur.
Henrik, thank you so much for your advice here, and really powerful, I think, for everybody out there who is thinking about memberships and how that all works out. As a final question before the breakouts, what are the companies coming out of this pandemic that you see? You're not only problem mining, you're company mining all the time. You support, you invest, you build. What are some ideas, some things that came across your desk, things that maybe just are in the process of creation and we don't know yet about, but will maybe be unicorns in a few years? What are you putting your bets on?
Well, I think obviously there seem to me there's kind of like different types of classes of companies. There are the companies that was kind of built in the 20th century, and there's the one that built in the 21st century. And I think, and obviously we can talk a little bit about like what are the different categories that I think is interesting. I really think it's as much about an approach of building a company. I think companies who are obsessing about the relationship with the customer and really truly meaningful giving a shit about their problems and using digital tools to allow them to scale the solution of that, I think it's going to do just fine. Now, obviously, there's some categories like hospitality and other things that is just having structural issue. But when that comes back, I think that you'll see stuff being built in that too. And so I guess like what I'm fascinated about is a little bit less about like, you know, autonomous driving or space or AI or healthcare. I'm interested in all those different ones. I'm really focusing about is like, how do you make sure you build a company in the right way? And if it's built in the right way, I kind of feel the score will take care of itself.
Wow. What is the right way though? So the right way is, I mean, when you have 1 million subscribers, how can you give, as you said, really give a shit about every single of this million? If imagine this would be 1 million people on the Zoom call, how could we, you know, give a shit about every single one? How can you create that feeling?
I mean, like you build systems for solving that, right? You know, we have, I think, 300 people sitting in Columbus, Ohio, and they will talk to over a third of our customers every month. And we will talk to them as a business goal. And so this is not about like, you know, I want to change my password. This is about us texting them and saying, hey, does your dog sleep on its paws on its back? And then get excited about that. Because once you have that emotional relationship and trust with a customer, I think you will have permission to offer them a lot of different services. But you have to make that team that I refer to is called Bark Happy. And that is the beating heart of our organization. It's where we do all our research. It's where we get all our insights. It's where every time when we mess up, we used to apologize. It's the company that kind of like send condolence card when people's dog unfortunately pass away of old age. And that is not about like, then obviously they're no longer a customer, but you know, they were our customer and their emotional well-being matters to us. And I think that if you walk into that relationship with that passion and that authenticity, I don't think that people will give up on you. And I think if you don't have that, then you just have to be cheaper and faster and more efficient than Amazon or like these very large companies. And that is a very difficult task. And so our strategy is to, you know, care as much about dogs, you know, as our customers do, and as we do with our own dogs, and then try to kind of like do that in a meaningful and scalable way.